Hello, hello! I am Ben Pick, and thank you for joining me in Running to Write, where I give questionable writing advice through writing metaphors. As a follow-up to last week's video about avoiding reader expectations, this one is the opposite. Even though we want to be surprised, readers still expect certain things to happen in a story. Take romances. If the story doesn't end with a happily ever after or a happy for now moment, readers will likely reject it and review bomb the story. They expected one thing and were delivered something different. Sure, stories should have twists and turns along the way, but in the end, certain story beats should be upheld. The fantasy heroes don't need to stop all evil across their world, but if the heroes die at the end of a 10-part series and then the villains go on to conquer that fantasy world and lead to a reign of terror, readers will be pissed. This isn't far off from what happened with the fantasy series, and the fans revolted. No, I'm not talking about Game of Thrones here, though that would still apply, where there was such a bad and poorly developed finale, along with countless instances of character assassination, that something that was so prominent in pop culture has all but been forgotten. Veronica Roth is another recent author who, at the end of her series, sacrificed the hero to save everyone, and the fans revolted. Thousands of people signed a petition to try and get her to change the ending, and she received graphic and numerous threats via Twitter. Those are extreme cases, and it is absolutely unfair to treat the authors that way. So how do we avoid that scenario? Assuming, of course, that we want to write a book that people care so passionately about. Here are 5 tips to write to an audience and to not disappoint them into giving us 1-star reviews. Number 1, know the genre. Going back to the romance story, if the main characters don't end up together, that would be fine for a different genre like drama or horror. If it's marketed as a romance though, readers will be disappointed if it doesn't end like they would expect, meaning the 2 main characters get together. Likewise, a fantasy epic where the heroes lose at the end of a massive series would feel like a big downer and a waste of time for anybody who read it. What if The Lord of the Rings ended with Frodo claiming the Ring of Power for himself, overthrowing Sauron, and conquering Middle-earth? That wouldn't be the fantasy story I love, and this evil ending of Lord of the Rings wouldn't have reshaped the fantasy genre as the original had. It would have been unique, sure, but ultimately forgotten. Number 2, hints, hints, hints. I mentioned this last week in the misdirection topic, but the clues needed to solve a murder mystery need to be present within the story. Readers expect these clues to build steadily until we can figure out who the murderer is. Likewise, any red herrings need to have evidence for why they can be discarded. I don't want to read a detective story where we meet the murderer a scene before the big reveal. Nor would I want to read a story that is overflowing with meaningless clues that I need to sift through, so any real suspect list feels like utter guesswork. I want the Goldilocks amount of clues. Not too many, and not too few. Sometimes I can figure out the mysteries before the book explains it. Sometimes I can't. Usually it comes down to my experiences and whether or not I have a specific set of knowledge to understand the clues that are presented. I do appreciate a writer who can incorporate their clues in a way so that the characters will analyze it, and thus give any reader a chance to solve the mystery on their own. We as writers need to do our full research and due diligence to ensure that those clues are as accurate as possible, thus giving readers the best possible chance to make the connections. Number 3, plot bunnies. Do what you can to tie up loose plot threads in the book in which they're introduced, though I do recognize that there is an art to having those carry through as an undercurrent across the series. In my case, I referenced these lingering plot bunnies at the end of the novel after the main conflict had been resolved. I had a subplot drive much of the emotional weight during the middle sections, though the antagonist came along and completely distracted the main characters, so they weren't able to resolve that middle conflict. However, at the end of the novel, one of the main characters referenced this lingering plot bunny and used it as motivation for them making a decision, as well as a promise to the future, which will play out in future novels in the series. Acknowledging that a plot thread hasn't reached its conclusion is much different than remembering that you left a plot bunny hanging on the side of a cliff 5 books later. Number 4, moral values. This is a touchy one, but there are certain moral wrongs which we can all agree on. Take A Song of Ice and Fire. Joffrey is a reprehensible person. Regardless of the circumstances that went into making him a monster, his actions are inexcusable. I know a few people who read those books to find out how long it would take to kill him off. We as readers expect good behaviors like compassion and bravery to be rewarded, whereas bad behaviors like murder and torture to lead to that character's demise. There are exceptions and sudden shifts, like when the heroic mentor sacrifices themselves and gets brutally murdered so that the main character can escape. Though in a lot of ways, that is still writing to expectations of the hero's journey. We expect that by the end of the story, everyone responsible for murdering that mentor will either be dead or worse off than when they started. Thus, characters who perform moral wrongs get punished, whereas those who do moral good deeds get rewarded. Be careful with this one though, as morality is largely up to the individual and their background. Please don't use this to perpetuate false moral wrongs and pretend to take the high ground. I'll be explicit here, don't use a false sense of morality to justify killing off gay characters. There is a terrible trope known as killing your gays. In order to show that a story is diverse, they'll often include one same-sex couple. However, when one or both of the members of that couple are killed off in a way which doesn't advance the story, that's bad storytelling, among other issues. I'm not saying to give certain characters plot armor. It does seem to be shady when the first or only characters to be killed off are the meaningless red shirts or the supportive same-sex couple. To me, it feels like writers and studios are trying to get the best of both worlds, where they can have a check mark and say that they have diverse characters, while then turning around and killing off said diversity to placate an audience that they shouldn't be catering to. Because any way you look at it, killing off characters for their beliefs, orientation, whatever, not only is that bad storytelling, but that is just morally wrong. And that is an issue for a completely different day, so I'm just going to move along. Lastly, number 5, storytelling basics. Does the story's pacing work? Meaning overall, does the tension build to a climax with minor spikes along the way? Chapter 2 should include an epic battle that carries more emotional weight than the grand finale. In a similar manner, the danger should build as the novel progresses. How can you do this while supplying a twist? What if the big bad were really being controlled by somebody who seemed like an underling? Thus, the true mastermind was someone everyone thought of as a joke. If that happens though, the true mastermind still needs to be a bigger threat than the big bad. Make the big bad a brute, a physical powerhouse that the heroes need to come together to stop. Once they do and have fully exhausted themselves, the true mastermind steps forward to reveal their plan to destroy the world. That raises the stakes, danger, and challenges the heroes face. A good way to build up to this would be to show that the villains have an intelligent plan, yet then show that the big bad is not smart enough to have created that plan. Better yet, have the characters recognize that the big bad couldn't have made that plan. Thus, they either underestimated the big bad, or there's some unknown person thrown in the mix. By adding in those clues, we get a satisfying twist, while also conforming to basic storytelling mechanics. The best way I can describe this is with 2 contradictory phrases: unpredictably predictable and inevitable surprise. Those lead to the most satisfying conclusions and twists within a story. When a writer makes readers feel like a story could have only ended one way, which also was a twist surprise, they have proven they are masters of the craft. Those are my 5 tips to writing to reader expectations. Give the readers what they want, especially when it's what they didn't know they wanted. I am Ben Pick, and thank you for joining me in Running to Write. If you enjoy my thoughts on satisfying audience expectations, then please press those like and subscribe buttons. Let me know in the comments how far you've gone to satisfy readers. Do you agree with my opinions, or is everything I said wrong? I post my running and writing progress on Instagram and Twitter as Running to Write, so be sure to follow me and join in with your own thoughts. Don't forget to sign up for the Writing to Write monthly newsletter for regular updates on my assorted musings, pitfalls, and lessons learned. If you like my debut novel, Falling Through, I'll be sending out the first 2 chapters of its sequel to those who sign up. As a bonus, I also plan to send out the outtakes from these recordings. It's nothing more than me stumbling over my words and swearing at myself, so feel free to laugh at my expense. I know I did. These will be sent through Ko-fi first, and then I'll be trickling it through my newsletter a month or so later. See you next time. Until then, give the readers what they want, especially when it's what they didn't know they wanted in our stories.